take, I don't know, 105 fucking out here. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I am here to talk to you with the lights on for once. This subject for the Rant files has been a long time coming. I am a collector of physical media, if you do not know. I primarily collect used games and DVDs, since they tend to be very, very cheap, depending upon which console for the game and which DVD and whether they're out of print or whatnot. But that aside, we're going to talk about the DVDs and the various forms of packaging that these movies or shows tend to come in. For the purpose of this video, I've only chosen to select single disc cases. And I am fully aware that depending upon the manufacturer that you order your product from, the type of case you receive could be different. I have looked at dozens of DVD cases from the mid-2000s, and many of them look the same. But it's just this one little area where they hold the disc that is different. Like there might be two little prongs that you push. There might be a button that you push. There might be three. There might be four little arrows that you hold down. There might just be one solid nub that you bend upwards on one of the little nooks at the side of the disc to get the disc off. It all just depends on who's making the case. But I have here 5 different types of cases to exemplify each era of DVD case making. We're going to start with the mid-2000s era DVD case, because that one I feel is the one that most people who collected DVDs would be most familiar with. I have here Castaway, picked up in the mid-2000s, probably 2002 or 2003. In this time period, this was the time period when DVDs were like the only media. VHS was there, still there, it was still there, it was dying, but it was still there. Just like DVDs is still here today, but it's dying, and we have Blu-rays and 4Ks replacing the DVDs. But right now, DVD in the early 2000s was the primary mode of media that you would pick up. So it would make sense then that the case that they put the DVD in would be pretty tanky. It would be built pretty solid. Like, I could pick up this case and it would have a weight to it. It would feel like I could hold down on the sides, and it would feel like this is a sturdy case. It was made with the intention of keeping what was inside it secure. And over here, sometimes on these older cases, if you could see, there would be this little nook in the middle here. That is usually where the retailer would put a sort of lock. They would lock the case so that you couldn't open it. Sometimes. So they would have to unlock the case or whatever so that you can open it. They would have a seal on that side. They would have a seal here. You even see the remnants of the top one here. They don't do that anymore. Not for most of them. Especially not for DVDs. When you open it, you're usually greeted with one of these, which is rare nowadays. Unless you got the little digital code on this for this piece of paper, but normally they don't give you this type of piece of paper. This is your chapter scene selection. A lot of the old mid-2000s DVDs came with these. Even though you had a scene selection on the disc itself, it was nice that they would show you the names of each chapter of the movie. Even though they don't really show you, like, a picture or anything like that. The scene selection shows you the pictures. You can look at this alongside your scene selection and know what each chapter was called. It's like a little book. I don't know. I thought that was cool. But when you move this aside, you can see here that the front here is made of solid plastic. It's not thin plastic. I don't know if it's recycled plastic, but it is solid plastic. And over here, one of the many different types of nubs that would keep the disc secure. This is just one of many of the mid-2000s. This one just has little 2 push prongs. You just push down, and the disc pops out. As you can see here, it's also solid plastic on the inside, the back side here. This is a case that was meant to last. It was meant to make sure that your disc would be protected. So long as you put the disc into the player, took the disc out, put it back into the case, it would be clear and crisp and scratch-free since the day you bought it. And I can honestly say that this is true. This we picked up in 2001 to 2002, somewhere around then, and the disc is scratch-free because we only pulled it out, put it into the player, watch the disc, and then we put it back into the case. So that shows us that it was very secure. The case itself would be dropped, it could be shooken around, but the disc inside would always be safe and snug. It was designed here to make it so that the disc wouldn't spin too much in the case, unless you actually put your finger on it, spin the disc on the disc. It wasn't made to have the disc spin, so it would stay secure. It would not spin inside the little ring there, and it was just a very solid, well-built case. That's how they did it in the mid-2000s, when the DVD was the only physical media form for films. But then, when Blu-rays started becoming the main method of physical media for movies, they started to care less and less about the DVD. As you could see here with my copy of Central Intelligence, pretty funny with Kevin Hart, it's a pretty funny film. As you could see here, this is how they make them now. Most of the main manufacturers use what they call it on this, inside here, they call this an eco box. The eco box is made of what I understand primarily recycled plastic. This way they don't have to keep manufacturing plastic and, polluting the environment. They just recycle the plastic. That's great, all more power to you. But they use less and less plastic with these cases. As you can see, there is nothing but this little wheel type thing protecting the case. This is just the paper sleeve that I'm poking right now. There is nothing protecting the inside of this case other than this laminated cover and the paper sleeve here. That's it. So if you poked this with, for example, if you were so inclined, if you wanted to take a pen or something and poke really hard at this, you could break the sleeve and the lamination. And if you wanted to, you can already start getting at the disc with that. And that's no good. That's not a good way of storing your case. Not long term, at any rate. Now, almost all of these manufacturers may have the same interior, little disc holder thing here, and most of them are fine for the most part. They will keep your disc snug and secure, but you have to worry, because with the inside of the being so thin, and there's nothing really holding it down on this side, if someone were to push really hard on this middle piece here, that would push on this, which would just push that like that and cause the disc to come loose, which means the disc could be loose in the case and you could cause it to scratch. I have opened brand new copies of these types of DVD cases with the disc loose, because this isn't designed to keep the disc safe and secure. It isn't designed to keep it snug, regardless of the type of wear and tear the outside of the case would receive. And no matter how you push hard on the middle or push hard at the bottom, the disc would be secure in a mid-2000s case. But in the 2010s case, these were just the packaging that you shipped the disc in. Most people probably throw away these eco boxes and just put these discs in like a disc sleeve or one of those CD cases or whatever. I like to keep the hard copies. I like to keep the cases because it looks good on my shelf. Like, it looks good showing it in a line next to all the other films. That's why I liked physical media. The problem is these eco boxes make it hard to keep these discs safe. So if you were like moving or something like that, you would have to be very careful with how you transported these cases because the discs could get loose. Even if they're stuck together in between where you have films to either side like this, you set them up like that in a box or something. If there's too much pressure on one case onto your middle case here, you can cause the push to hit your little disc in the middle there, and it would release the disc from the inside and cause it to become loose inside. That hasn't happened to me yet in my collection, but I have seen it happen in brand new cases. Sealed, but the disc was loose inside the case because they just didn't design it well. They're very cheap. Now, the other type of eco box that they were making was something in the early 2010s. This one's 1408, one of the best horror movies ever made, in my opinion. But here we have the other type of eco box. As you can see, it's still solid plastic here, but we have the same type of design as on this side here. It's just thin plastic on these little areas instead of completely open, which is fine because it's solid plastic. It is going to keep your disc secure. It's still going to give this little bit of weight to it. They have the same type of secured little type of prong as they had with this one here. The same type right there, which means that the disc can get loose, but it's just not as likely to happen because you have a more solid case. So it wasn't as likely to happen. I didn't see the disc be loose in the case on any new eco box of this type of parameter. They don't make these as often. I wish they did, but they don't make them as often. These tend to be the ones they make the most often. These tend to be the ones most manufacturers go for. It's cheaper than this one. I don't know, by a few pennies, but hey, a penny for like every 6,000 copies is like $6, I guess, whatever. But I prefer these to the other types of eco boxes. Now, if you've been to a rental store, you probably came across cases like this one. This is Terraverse, a very bare-bones sci-fi horror flick, but hey, we're not talking about the film. We're going to talk about the case. If you recognize that icon here, I'm going to shine a flashlight on it. Do you recognize that? Can you read that? If you probably should be able to. Right there. Blockbuster. This is a Blockbuster case. What Blockbuster did is whenever they purchased their films for media, they would take them out of their original case. They would take them out of the original case, that like whatever case that they came in. They would take the disc out and put them into these tanks. The reason why they did this, though, was because these tanks were designed to work with their lock system, their security system. They would put a little piece of plastic in between here that would go all the way down to the top here, and it would make it so that you couldn't open this no matter what. And that was a way of keeping the DVDs from being stolen. Now, some other rental media stores that I know about, I think Hastings used to do this. They have cases as well like this, that they have a little security, but some would just take the disc out of the case and just put the case on the shelf. So you could pop it open, but there would be no disc to steal. Blockbuster didn't do this. They just kept the disc in the case. They just locked it. But they sold, when they were going out of business, they sold all their films as is in these cases. They just pulled a little piece of plastic out and just gave you the case, because they didn't have the original case anymore. They just tossed those out. These cases are tanks. They were made to be secure. They were a security measure to protect the disc from being stolen. But they were also made to protect the disc from being banged up in transit, because it would be picked up and moved around to many people because they were renting the film many times. And so long as you kept the disc in the case after watching it, the disc would be in very good shape. This film has been in dozens and dozens and dozens of homes. But I can tell here that whoever rented this, the many people who rented it, did actually just put the disc right back into the case after watching it, because this disc is in very good shape. And as we can see on the insides here, we have a solid plastic wall here, and a solid plastic inside here with the little ring nub here. This little ring nub would go onto the inside here of this little ring nub. There's a slight little indentation here. The reason they did that was to make sure that the disc wouldn't spin in transit. That would also protect the inner ring from getting scratched, which was very good. It was very good. Once you get a little helpful tip for any hard copy collectors, this inner ring here, there might not be any information on it, but this white part here is the most important part of the disc, and it's also the most fragile. If you get this part of the inner ring cracked, which can happen if you're trying to pull the disc out in the wrong way, if it gets cracked, that crack can travel up the inner ring of the disc into the white area that you see here, and once it passes the white area into this little different color reflective area, once it reaches that ring right here, it's over. The disc is dead. It's not going to be able to play. So you have to be very careful about this inner ring. The light scratches on the outer ring of the disc aren't as important as any types of cracks on this inner ring. That's why when you make cases like this, you have to make them with the design of protecting this inner ring. A lot of used rental stores, Blockbuster did do it with this one, but they would usually put a little plastic sticker around the ring as a little extra mode of protection. They didn't do it with this one. Hastings does it with their discs. But as you can see here, this is probably the most protective case since the mid-2000s case here. I would argue that this case is more protective of the disc inside than the mid-2000s case here. Because that was the point. They did this not just to protect the disc from being stolen, but it was also to protect the disc from wear and tear. Because they wanted to sell it, to rent this out to as many people as possible to get the most money that they could out of it. I really like these cases. I would probably replace all of these cheap eco boxes with Blockbuster cases if I could. The last one I want to show you here is one of the indie cases. This is an indie company who manufactured this, probably not through a primary manufacturer that these big companies like Warner's and Paramount would go to have their DVDs mass manufactured. This is an indie manufacturer case, and you could tell this feels like a case that came out of the mid-2000s, and it shows. This film is two films in one. Isn't the best. They're indie films. But the case is what we're going to talk about here. Because if I am correct in my assumption here, this DVD is the only platform that they released this film on, these two films on, for the Western audiences. So they didn't release it on Blu-ray, they didn't release it on 4K, they might have released it digitally, they definitely released it digitally, but for your hard copy physical media, DVD might have been the only outlet that they had. Which probably means, then, that they wanted to make a case that would keep it snug and secure. Which is why this is reminiscent of the mid-2000s level cases. That's just my assumption. But these cases, while not as secure, because you could definitely tell this is recycled plastic, but while these cases might not be as secure as the mid-2000s, they're far more secure than the Eco boxes, because they're made of thicker plastic. They're made of a thicker plastic that was intended to keep your disc snug and secure. You can even tell here that this is a much better inner ring protector. You push down and you had to pull up. Just like there was no wear and tear on this inner ring trying to get the disc out. And you can also see that there's a little ring here that would also protect the inner ring of the disc from being spun around a lot. They took some care in keeping the disc safe, even though it's like an indie art house film. They're really fine. I think the entity is pretty cool in this film. But, it's just a really nice game. If I had to rank these 5 cases that I've shown you, the best one is clearly the Blockbuster case. The worst one is clearly the Eco box here. The just paper, just no protection at all. Very little plastic, very little security, very little structure. It's very flimsy. I would say that's the worst one. Followed closely by the other Eco box. It's slightly more secure. You got full plastic here, but still very thin plastic. But at least it's a little bit more secure. It's just a little bit better than the Eco box, the other Eco box, which we would follow by the Indie box here. The Indie box is made securely, snug and a rug and a bucket zug, but it's just not as secure as the mid-2000s box. The mid-2000s box, the mid to early 2000s boxes, were made to keep your disc safe. It was made to keep the disc snug and secure because it was the only physical media outlet they had for these. So this was the prime dollar case. The VHS was the low dollar case. So back then, when this was their best method of physical media, they cared about the case. So they gave you a good case. Now the top dollar one, the top dog, is your Blockbuster case. This was made with security in mind, not just to protect the disc from being stolen, but it was also made to keep the disc from being scratched from daily wear and tear. It was going to get scratched regardless, depending, because they couldn't tell what the renter would do. Sometimes a renter would take the disc out of the case and they would put it in their little player, and then they would just set it down. They would just set the disc down next to the player all week. Even though they had the case right next to it, the disc would be sitting down face down with the worst part you could put down on the disc, like I'm doing right now on the desk, exposing it. So if you slid the disc around, if you slid it around, you would scratch up the bottom, and you would really mess it up. That's why we keep the discs in the case. You pull the disc out of the film, out of your player, and you put it back in the case. You don't leave it on the side here. You don't do that. Don't do that, please. That has been a quick shot through 5 types of DVD cases that have been made for DVDs over the course of its lifespan. There are quite a few other types that I have in my collection, but a lot of them are just different variations of this. Like, you can open this and they're just different pictures on this. Like, sometimes you got 3 arrows instead of this. And that's the same for this one. You'd have different types of icons and designs on the inside instead of the way it looks here. And then that's probably the only type of indie box case that I have here. But this one, they would have dozens of these little inner ring designs. The case itself was solid plastic, would always be secure, but the inner ring here itself would always be of a different design. This one shows just the 2-button push. Sometimes there's just the 1-button push. Sometimes there are little 3 arrows. Sometimes there's 4 arrows. Sometimes there's these little teeth that you had to bend forward. Sometimes there's just a solid nub. It just depends on who made it. But they were all solid plastic. And then, of course, you got the Blockbuster case. This has been a crash course in DVD case making and packaging. I thought, why not make that? I would love to rant more about the cheap eco boxes, but this has been 25 minutes. I doubt you've been keeping up for this entire time, but if you have, thank you thank you very much for following me up until this point. There will be more content in the future, I imagine. And remember, be imaginative. Oh, and maybe like and subscribe, possibly, and maybe leave a comment. All of this helps. Take care.